Hi, OCBC. This is the first of a series of midweek videos that will accompany us through our journey in the Gospel of Mark. The sermons for 11 weeks, all the way up to Easter, are engaging Mark, and those sermons are sticking really closely to the text itself. And in these midweek videos, I want to step outside of the text to talk a little bit about the gospel itself and various interpretive issues that come up in the gospel that are really interesting to note and to explore a bit to understand Mark and his message better. Some of this might be interesting for you to discuss also in your small group Bible studies that many of you are in. But today I want to talk just a bit about the composition itself, Mark's gospel. Mark is writing this gospel for those who already know the basic Christian story. Many of us, I think, assume oftentimes that the earliest Christians got to know the Christian story through the Gospels, but that is not the case. Most of the earliest Christian communities got to know the gospel through missionaries like Paul and Silas, and through the letters that Paul and others wrote to the early churches. And Paul and other Christian missionaries had been writing about the basic overarching kind of story of Christ, the resurrection and death, and the theological meanings of those things to early Christian churches for some time. But here is where Mark comes in. Eugene Boring, one of the New Testament scholars I've been drawing on in this series, says, Mark is the first New Testament author to express Christian faith through the narrative medium of a comprehensive story of the earthly Jesus. So as you read Mark and try to understand what he's doing here, understand he is talking to people who already know something of the basic Christian story and theology, who are practicing Christian faith. This is another interesting little excerpt from a New Testament scholar named Francis Maloney. Listen to what Maloney says about Mark. He says, whatever the first readers knew of the life story of Jesus of Nazareth was subverted by the Markan story. They were not familiar with this plot, Jesus' presence in Galilee, his single journey to Jerusalem to be rejected, tried, and crucified, the resurrection, and the surprising silence of the women. It saw the light of day for the first time when Mark invented it. It is this radical newness of the Markan story which must be kept in mind. So whereas the Christian faith had been conveyed before in teachings about Jesus, this is the first time that the story of Jesus is presented in a narrative form in the Gospel of Mark. Keep in mind that Mark doesn't know the other Gospels, Matthew, Luke, and John. They haven't been written yet. In fact, Matthew and Luke draw upon Mark as they write their Gospels. Mark is doing something radically new here, and he is doing something that will surprise his original hearers. A few other things I think that are helpful to know about Mark, just very basically as we get started. Mark, we don't know anything really about who this person is. There have been lots of traditions that have grown up around the identity of Mark, but really we don't know who Mark is. Mark was the most common name in the Roman world. Mark is writing sometime between 60 and 80 CE. We don't know precisely when the gospel is penned, but somewhere in that very tumultuous time. You can think about what you know about 70 CE. The Roman Empire destroys the temple, ransacks Jerusalem. So it's a very tumultuous time sociopolitically that he's writing in there. Now, something really interesting and important as we read through the gospel and hear these stories and the metaphors that are used is to notice that there aren't a lot of urban metaphors. There aren't a lot of wealthy people in this gospel. Mark has poor people playing leading roles in these stories, and likely Mark and his community belonged to a lower socioeconomic stratum. Mark's Greek is pretty rough. Matthew and Luke and John have very elegant Greek. Mark is a very rough Greek. He uses kai, the word and, to string together sentences all throughout the gospel. It's less elegant, probably because Mark is not as educated as the writers of Matthew and Luke and John. So 3 things I just want to leave you with, to take away as you continue exploring this gospel together. One is Mark is writing to insiders like you, people who know something about the Christian faith and the story of Jesus. But Mark is writing something that is intended to surprise us. Notice where you are surprised by what you are hearing in this gospel. Especially as we get later into the text, when you start to see some very apocalyptic imagery. Notice when that arises in the text and how that sits with you as you read this narrative. It'll be a really different experience than reading just little bits and pieces of Mark throughout the year. Going through the entire narrative, you'll be able to see where the story arrests your attention. And then, importantly, Mark is aiming to promote growth in discipleship among his Christian community. He is aiming for people to read this story and for it to bolster their practice of faith. So I hope that you will also read it with that orientation in mind. Where is Mark's gospel challenging you to grow in your own understanding of Jesus and practice of the way of Christ?